Hey everybody, today I have educator Zach Morris with me for this parent lenient episode. And for those of you who don't know Zach specializes in working with parents and young adults who are navigating the complex dynamics of neurodivergent experience. Zach is uniquely equipped to serve families with profiles of autism, especially PDA. I know we have a lot of listeners with kids who have some demand avoidance tendencies, families who are navigating trauma, and families that are needing to heal and repair relationships. And Zach's been on the show many times, so I'll have links to some of those past visits on the show notes page. And he's also a parent coach in my Differently Wired Club. Okay, so we are going to tackle a really good question. As with most of the questions we go into, I think this is one that is going to resonate with a lot of listeners in some capacity. So the question is, how can I improve my child's self-esteem despite what feels like contact affirmations from me about how I love him always and no matter what, whether he's happy, angry, sweet, or sour, he has taken to saying he's the worst and that we don't really love him or that we hate him. How can I help him feel more confident? And a little context we got for this question. This is a 7-year-old boy who is autistic, gifted, Tourette's, ADHD-like symptoms. He has some issues with sensory overload and frustration tolerance. He doesn't yet know all his diagnoses because of this complex profile, which continues to change. What they say is all brains work differently and that that's a good thing. So Zach, I'm actually going to ask you to kick us off with this one. I'd love to hear what came up for you when you heard this question.
Yeah, the first thing that came up for me is just how complex of sort of processes may be going on for kiddo here that is contributing to some of this. So I think that's sort of the first thing I'm thinking about is even just making sense of sort of what's maybe going on here. And I think about kiddos like this, right? Kiddos with this neurotype, this type of nervous system that I just may be more susceptible to also experiencing threat. And so even inside of so many of the support offerings or affirmations or all of those things, there's so much out there that we don't know that might be just sort of being picked up on as threat that again isn't logical or doesn't sort of track reason based. And that could literally just be how I'm perceiving a certain tone or how, even though someone else might perceive that tone really differently, right? So just that complexity of how I might perceive threat and what that just might do to my system, and therefore how I view myself, how I view other people viewing me, things like that, right? So then I start to think about just sort of like the general culture of shame and blame that we live in also, right? Even outside of our family unit and us as parents and what we're saying, right? Like even outside of all of that, we're definitely still just part of a general culture of shame and blame, right? And so if I watch movies, if I watch, right, like all of these things, like there's such little subtleties that are sort of putting value judgment on whether we're getting it right. And that's sort of the next thing I think about, right? Is that for so many of these kids, there's such a focus on getting it right? I just want to get it right. I just want people to see me as good, right? Like I may have such a sensitivity to also that measuring stick that I'm kind of oriented to. Like, am I getting it right? Am I getting it right? Am I getting it right? Right. And so when I think about how we're trying to support, right, our kids, growing more confident and more comfortability in themselves and self-esteem, right, and all of these things, I think about trying to help our kids orient to like a new measuring stick for themselves. Like if that's what's happening, if I'm sort of so often focused on like, am I getting it right? And that's kind of how I'm assessing things for myself. Like, how else might I be able to sort of assess my role or experience with things like how comfortable I am, right? Or how much I'm enjoying something, right? Or how authentic something feels, right? There's a lot of ways of sort of orienting to something, right? I'm going to keep going if that's okay. I have a lot of ideas kind of flowing right now. Is when we think about getting it right, right? And my sort of orientation to assessing that and wondering how other people are assessing that, I think about our need for reassurance, right? And that's, I think, what's almost being talked about in this question, right? Is like I'm offering all of these things for reassurance, but my kiddo's not feeling reassured in this. They're not feeling reassured that we love them and it's okay, right? And all of these things. And so I think about reassurance as, again, a need that gets met. But the strategy for meeting that need could be many different strategies, right? And it might be that I just might not get my need for reassurance very met from just hearing sort of verbal affirmations, right? So just like hearing someone tell me it's okay, or hearing someone tell me they love me, like that might not meet my need for reassurance, right? Not that it's not an offering that could do that or do that for someone else, but for me, it just might not, right? Because of some of maybe my sensitivity, right, to that threat, right, to that we were almost even starting to talk rejection sensitivity stuff here. I would really encourage this parent and people to look into, RSD, rejection sensitive dysphoria type stuff. Even if we're not talking that, there's a lot of rejection sensitivity going on for these neurotypes a lot of times. So that's, again, that sort of complex processing of just extra sensitivity and how do I get reassured, right? Maybe I get reassured from just moments of connection and joy. And just, I notice, like, after I did that for an hour kind of together, like, oh, I just all of a sudden actually have a greater sense that people love me and it's okay, like more so than when they were just telling me, possibly, right? So there's so many complexities to like what does meet that need for reassurance for me, right? And that might not be what's going on, but that could be a layer to this, right? I also, the last thing I kind of want to mention is it's a long game process and it's slow. But what I think and what I see to be really impactful for kiddos, navigating stuff like this is really just getting to know my experience a little bit more. So as we also think about like what happens right before I'm like telling myself that you hate me, or like what happens right before I don't think you love me, like, are we able to sort of support our kiddo in starting to identify like whether it's some of those sensations physically or whether that's other thoughts in the brain that come up or things they observe in their visual field, like what happens right before this? Because if we can get to know that space, we might start to actually have more opportunities before I'm totally panicked or totally, stuck in those sort of narratives of habit, that have started to develop.
So a couple of things just on what you were talking about, that last thing, that skill of kind of starting to notice right before it comes up. I just want to reiterate that is kind of a long game kind of a situation. And it's exciting to think about getting to a point where you can really identify that. So you can be in it more consciously as you navigate, all the feelings and the needs that aren't being met. So I love that. And I also the way you honed in on this need for reassurance, I think is so important. So I just want to reiterate that, and that need to be reassured may not be being met by the ways that the parents, for example, in this question are trying to meet it. One of the things I had written down is that as parents, we're not necessarily the most trusted sources of validation for our kids because, when you're my parents, of course you think that. Of course you think I'm great at this. Of course you love me, right? And so I think when parents try to validate or convince a child that they're not who they feel they are, or that they have nothing to feel bad about, there's this almost immediate dismissal that doesn't really count because it's coming from you. So I really like this idea of thinking about other ways that need for being reassured can be met. A couple other things that came up for me as I was thinking about this question. One is some kids have a nature or temperament that is kind of inherently more of a glass half empty kind of a temperament or nature, and who may kind of, this may just be part of the wiring as well. And so it can be really hard for parents if you have a child who tends to kind of seems as if they came out of the womb with a low self-esteem, with a low sense of self, with low confidence. And while I do think there are absolutely things we can do to support and to build up positive experiences and really kind of make some progress in that area, it can be also just a good reminder to ourselves that there's also a thing such as a personality or who we are. And we're not necessarily going to change someone who, if they are that kind of more negative mindset or glass half empty person, flip a switch and kind of pivot them to being like a positive optimist. So just putting that out there. A couple other things, just as, for parents, this can bring up a lot of anxiety in us because none of us want to raise a kid who has low self-esteem. We've read the studies. We know that how important it is to have confidence, to feel good about yourself, all of those things. And so we can get really anxious about this. Like, this is on me. I have to do what I need to do to help my kid feel better about themselves. And so that drive can also lead to us trying to overcompensate. And that can mean that we might be inauthentic in the way that we are, praising certain things or bringing attention to things. And again, our kids can pick up on inauthenticity like nobody's business. So it's really important to just kind of tease out, where is my anxiety playing a role in this? And what am I making it mean if my child is feeling not so great about themselves? And what is that bringing up for me? And how can I take care of that? The last thing that I would say is, in terms of, building up their confidence. I mean, this may kind of seem obvious, but we know these kids have so many inherent strengths, and they have interests, and they have these gifts and talents that are also inherent to who they are. And so what we want to do as parents is try to find and seek out opportunities where they can just spend time in flow, where they can spend time doing things that they really enjoy, where they feel good about themselves, and kind of fill up that bank of positive experiences. And as part of that, encourage our kids to reflect on how they feel about it. I noticed that you were completely immersed in that building project on Minecraft. What did that feel like? What do you love about that? And just kind of drawing attention to things when they are in that flow, positive state, so that they can start to, build up some of the confidence. Because self-esteem is really, if we're trying to build our self-esteem based on others' validation, that's not a great plan, right? And in fact, there's a movement to replace self-esteem with self-worth. And that's something that we can develop on our own. And so the more that we can kind of highlight, strengths of our kids and encourage them to reflect on them themselves, that can help them over time. Again, we're playing the long game, but kind of build up their self-worth in a way that actually does feel authentic and that they can have some true agency over. So that's what came up for me. I'm just wondering, is there anything that my response brought up in you, Zach, that you want to speak to, or anything else you want to add?
Yeah, I love that, and I'm sure we could keep ping ponging back and forth here. I was thinking about, when you were talking about kind of empathizing, with them, where it's like I might be someone that just kind of, has that orientation to stuff a little bit more naturally, right? That, like, when I'm having the experience of thinking you don't love me, or I'm not good enough, or all of those things, to just hear the opposite of that, kind of to your point, might not actually feel good. It might not feel, oh, great, I'm so glad right. It might be like, wait, but you don't understand. You're not hearing me. Right. And so like, so I think that it, as parents, and I feel this myself, right, that it can be hard sometimes to like want to go in and sort of empathize and be with that experience that they're having, because we want to help remind them of the other side. We want to like show them they are loved, right? All of those things. But I actually see it being so helpful, right? Especially over time, right? Long game approach to maybe actually going into that space and empathizing and being with them in that experience of thinking you hate them right now, and like how hard that must be, and how like, like scary that must feel, right? And like, can I actually go there with you and have that make so much sense, right? That actually like you're having this experience right now, and gosh, that must be really scary. Like that might actually help me feel a little bit more reassured that, oh, it's okay that I'm having this experience, not actually maybe just another version of me not getting it right. Like if I'm like, oh, you don't love me, but I hear actually all the ways in which I should be thinking that you do love me, or all of that, I just might be going through another experience of maybe not getting it right in some way, right? And so I think just remembering for us as parents that like when our kids are in that moment, there's like panic online. We're like panicking, right? And so in that panic, I can't reason, I can't maybe see what you see. So I really need to hear and see that you can understand what I see right now. You can understand what I feel right now.
1,000% validate that feeling, because it is their feeling. And as part of that, us not panicking about it. So we can validate without agreeing, but we can certainly acknowledge that must be so hard to feel that way.
Exactly.
Gosh, that is a big, heavy feeling. And doing that with calmness and steadiness.
Yeah.
So we show them we can tolerate this, and you can tolerate this too. It's just a feeling. So good. So good.
Yeah.
Well, okay. I think that was a lot of feedback for that question. I hope that the person who asked it and all the listeners get something out of that. And if you have a child who's struggling with low self-worth, low self-esteem, low confidence, hopefully that gave you some things to reflect on. So, Zach, I want to thank you for joining me to talk through this. I want to thank the listener for that question. And yeah, just sign off for now. Thanks again, Zach.